Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, an interview-style podcast where leaders share insights about their leadership journey and experiences. I'm your host, Craig Bulmer, a people and capability specialist whose purpose is to create opportunities to optimise people's performance. Welcome to Leadership Unlocked. Today I'm joined by Dr. Tim Baker. Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Craig.
Thanks so much for being a guest on my podcast. I'm seeing your stuff around on social for some time now. I've got your book as well. So, it's great to have you on board.
Thank you. No, I look forward to it.
So tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do. As always, we allow our guests a 2-minute pitch, give or take. So let us know a bit about what you're doing.
All right. Well, I've been probably in this game. Well, I have been in this game for 20 years as a self-employed consultant, and I focus on leadership and performance. They're the sort of bylines of what I talk about. I've been doing that. So that involves workshops. It involves keynote addresses. It involves coaching. And I'm also an author. I've got 18 books out at the moment. So it's a labour of love for me apart from anything else. So
here I am saying I've got your book, you've got 18.
Sorry?
I said, here I am saying I've got your book and you've got 18 books. So I've got one of your books.
Oh, well, which one have you got?
I actually haven't got it with me. I'm in a different room. I can't tell you which one it is, sorry.
Yeah. But the focus is pretty much on leadership and you know, I really get back to basics. It's about the human element of leadership that I think is critically important, and not in a soppy way, obviously, but I do believe in that.
What's got you to where you are? Obviously, you've got a doctorate in this. I assume it's in business studies or, tell me more about that.
Yeah, look, I was very interested in the employment relationship. I never quite understood why it was so adversarial. And I say that because obviously employers get something out of that employment relationship. They're able to make a profit. But also the standard of living has increased since the Industrial Revolution. So clearly employees are able to buy houses and all sorts of things. And I never quite understood why it was so adversarial. And I developed what I call the new employment relationship model, which was really a model around looking at the key factors that both employers and employees could benefit from. So, for example, flexible deployment is one of those values. Obviously, a leader wants people to be flexibly deployed because the world is changing so quickly. But also an employee develops a skill set where they can take that across the road and work somewhere else. So I came up with these 8 values and, wrote my thesis and wrote a couple of books about it.
Wonderful. And what was your background before that? I totally agree with you from the adversarial point. I still think it is that. But what were you doing? Were you in leadership roles? Were you having your own business? What was running there?
Yeah. Look, I started out as a teacher years ago. I didn't last very long. Didn't really suit me. I mean, I'm really grateful that I did teaching because it teaches you a lot of things about presenting and structuring learning opportunities, as you'd know. Started there, then moved into management, got to senior management positions, and then I decided that I'd go out on my own, and I've been out on my own ever since. And, 20 years as a consultant's a long time, people would say, but thoroughly enjoy it. And there's always variety. There's always things that happen every day that you don't expect. No 2 days are the same. So, yeah, it's fantastic.
Were you in a specific industry, or were you across industry when you went into corporate?
I was in education to start with because that was an easier transition from teaching into leadership, and then I got into universities. I was in conference managing, so I did a couple of things, and even in the retail area. So I had a fairly broad background in leadership, and now I'm working across 21 industries. So I've got everyone from basically police through to orchestras and everything in between. So it's been quite interesting.
Yeah, right. And how do you feel about leadership? Do you think we're getting better at it? Have
It's
we?
a really, yeah, look, it's a great question, isn't it? It's something that keeps us occupied. Look, when we see a good leader, there's clearly some things that they're doing. And
Mm,
when we see a poor leader, there are clearly things that they're not doing. So we know what good leadership looks like and what poor leadership looks like. I'd have to say there's more poor leadership than good leadership. And that's probably what keeps us engaged and employed in what we do.
mm,
But I think good leaders develop that rapport. They develop that working relationship. I don't mean a friendship, but they develop a good, constructive working relationship with the direct reports. I think that makes all the difference. And I remember Kuzner and Posner in one of their books, Credibility, said that leadership is a relationship. I thought it was a brilliant little phrase, not a personal relationship, obviously, but a relationship nevertheless. And there's only one way that we can have a relationship with anybody, which is what we're doing now, and that is conversation at a time. There is no other way of doing it. You can text people and you can send people emails, but it's all about that conversation. I think it's the underutilized tool of leadership. And I think, saying to people, you need to have regular catch ups. Well, people nod their head and say, that's a great idea. But you find the very good ones do, and they know they do it because it's an investment. The ones that think it's a good idea and perhaps don't or neglect it, normally busyness gets in the way. And to me, it's the most underrated leadership capability. It sort of sorts them out, really. We can talk about direction and we can talk about, charisma and all sorts of things. But if people haven't got a connection with their direct reports, they're not going to get that little extra discretionary effort from people. And that to me is the key. And it's the conversation, it's the human side of it.
therefore, it makes it harder, doesn't it? Because the generations that are coming through seem to be expecting more. We're hearing this word entitlement
Yeah.
often. So it seems to me that being in a leadership role is so much more difficult than it was because everybody's wanting so much more.
I think you're right to a certain degree.
Mm,
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think you're right to a certain degree. I think what's happened is that I think it was in the 1990s we had these seminars you could go to, how to deal with a Generation X and a Y.
mm,
I'm not convinced that that was a great idea. I actually think that humans have got the same fundamental needs. And I think what's happened is we've kind of categorized people. But when I work with young people, I don't know what your view is about this, but when I talk to them about, having conversations and the value of that, and they practice that, they're very receptive to it. I just think they've been brought up in a world where conversations are had via a whole lot of other medium. But I think it resonates with people, and I think it's more important now than ever. I actually would argue that organisations are conversations. If you think about it, they go on every day in the boardroom, in the lunchroom, in the toilet, car park,
mm.
you name it. And if you try to change a culture or improve the leadership capability, it's really about improving the quality of the conversation that people have. And I think young people are receptive to that. But I think what's interesting is that if, probably both of us run programs on how to have conversations. But if our parents were alive today and we went and said to them, guess what, mum and dad, today we had a full day workshop on how to have a conversation, they would laugh their head off. They'd think the most ridiculous thing they've ever heard. That's
Yeah.
how far removed we've come from just doing what's natural, which is talking to each other.
I guess, yeah. And, if I was to really simplify it again, one of the things I'm incredibly passionate about is this listening to understand, not listening to respond.
Yes.
And I don't think we do that well as a general rule. We're always listening and ready, and we're creating our own response before we've actually really. What was it that person said? Where are they coming from? What's my understanding of that? And at times being able to let that roll and not have to make a comment on it. honest statement.
Yeah, look, it's like Daniel Goldman says that listening is like the common cold. It's very, it's something that we just don't do very well. And when I'm coaching people, I've often sat down and said, look, they've often said to me, well, how do I get my people to be more receptive to my ideas? How do I actually have some influence? How do I get them to listen to me?
Mm.
And obvious answer is you listen to them. I
Yeah.
mean, if you listen to them, they're going to listen to you. It's pretty basic stuff, really. So it surprises me how. But look, I think the other thing is leaders that usually come up through technical capabilities. So they might be an accountant or an engineer or something. So their whole success is based on answering questions, not asking questions. So then they're thrust into the leadership role and they're expected to listen and they're expected to ask questions, fundamental things, and they struggle with that, don't they? It's quite amazing.
Yeah, I just saw it just a moment ago. In fact, in my house, builders came over to finish up a garden for us, and one of these guys was running late, and he just went off at him. And I was like, it was no need to do that, A, in front of the customer, just one of my points, but B, he didn't listen to see what had happened. What had happened at Bunnings for him to be later? Like, was there a queue? Were they out of stock? Did they have to get, like, there could have been a bunch of reasons. Was there a car broken down in front of him? Just didn't take the time to find out what had happened to see if there was a legitimate reason.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And that's why I really believe the underrated part is to actually have that regular catch up once a month or whatever, and to have not to just talk about work, obviously, but to talk about performance and development, because then the trust builds, the engagement builds, the understanding builds,
Mm.
and maybe when that happens, those sorts of incidents may not occur as often as they should or they do, unfortunately. But, I think sometimes leaders think that they're supposed to have all the answers. They're supposed to,
Yeah.
they're supposed to be the ones with all the certainty and all the direction. But the world we're living in, no one's got the answers. So it's always about collaboration, isn't it?
And that hasn't changed, has it? That feeling of I'm now the boss, I need to know everything. I'm
Well,
surprised that that hasn't evolved more than it probably should have.
I think it comes back to this entitlement thing. And, I've often said to people, and it's a very provocative question, why should anyone be led by you?
Mm.
And, it's a good question because if you can't answer that, then how would anyone reporting to you be able to answer that? So leadership's a privilege, not an entitlement. But I think some people don't see it that way. And I think it comes back to this sort of them and us, this employment relationship stuff that we've been talking about, where, I'm the boss, I do the thinking, you do the doing. And where does a leader learn their leadership capabilities from? Not from a training course. They learn it from their previous boss. And where does he or she learn it? From their boss. And so this kind of thing perpetuates. And even though we're living in a world that's completely different to what it was 100 years ago, we're still enacting some of those very traditional them and us type qualities, which obviously impede modern leadership.
Yeah, I was speaking to a client yesterday around this concept of, gone are the days where you as an employer are interviewing somebody and that person's, answering the questions in such a way, I hope you like me, I hope you like me, I hope you choose me. It
Mm.
seems to be opposite now, where the employee or prospective employee is interviewing the employer, going, "Okay,
Yes.
so tell me your values. Tell me how you lead. What do you like? What don't you like? What sort of groups are you supporting? Because I don't care if you like me or not. I need to like you."
Yeah, I think that's very healthy. And, as we've just talked about, I think younger generation get a bad rap. But I actually think that's a good development because those younger people haven't been indoctrinated by this idea of, you're the boss and I'm here to do what you tell me to do. And they're expecting more out of the relationship. And some bosses who are very traditional probably haven't worked out what that is. So I think it's actually a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned before about, meeting roughly once a month. But what I picked out when you answered that question was once a month to talk about performance. So tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking there around what does that conversation look like on a monthly basis in your mind?
Yeah, look, I put together a 5 conversations framework for that very reason, because I understood that a lot of leaders had trouble having these regular catch-ups. What do we talk about? Which is quite amusing in its own right. But so conversation one is climate review, which is not about the weather, but it's really about, people's job satisfaction. And we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on these employment engagement surveys online.
Yeah.
Why don't we just have a conversation about those things? So I often start that conversation with, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate your current job satisfaction? Now, we know these things ebb and flow, but someone says a 6, and then you say, well, why? And then you might say, well, do you think it could ever go from a 6 to a 7? And normally they will say yes, but sometimes 6 is as good as it gets. And you say, well, what do I need to do to help you get from a 6 to a 7? So you have this conversation. It's a very easy, pleasant conversation. They go for about 20 minutes. And then conversation 2 is a strengths and talents conversation. And this is really about, instead of going for what people are not good at, let's talk about what people are good at. Mm-hmm. Let's start with that. And again, that's not common, is it, in the workplace? No. So I often start that conversation with, what's the one thing that you enjoy most about the work you do? Now, there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what people are good at, and they will tend to gravitate to what they're good at. So by asking that question, they might say, oh, I really enjoy interacting with clients or customers. Say, well, that's great. What can we do to perhaps give you more opportunity to do that in your current arrangements? There might be nothing, but at least we've had that conversation. And so we start on an upward spiral of positivity rather than downward spiral of negativity. Conversation 3 is opportunities for growth. And that is, again, I'm expecting that person to come to that meeting prepared. I don't want to be sitting there praising what they're not good at. Let them come to me and let them share what their development opportunity is over the next 6 months and how I might be able to support them in that. So, all of these are performance and development conversations. And then conversation 4 is around the learning and development conversation. And this is around, because we've had conversation 2, which is strengths, conversation 3, which is opportunities for growth. There's going to be some learning opportunities out of that. Not necessarily sending people off to courses. It might just be about mentoring. It might be about, giving people, exposure to certain types of things that the business may not normally give them exposure to. So we do that. And then conversation 5 is innovation and continuous improvement. So this is, whereas 4 is about themselves, 5 is about the workplace and how they can bring or suggest things. It may not be earth-shattering. It might just be a notice board up on there, or maybe a debrief after our projects. And so once you've got through those 5, you can go back and start again. So just imagine, Craig, if every organisation that you and I worked with, just imagine if every leader was having 10, 20-minute performance and developmental conversations, as I've just explained, there'd be no issues there in that workplace. People would be, they would be engaged. And
because,
yeah, so that's my
thing is that conversation number 2 is you could easily say, oh, this is, these are the strengths, but and then you get people doing their strengths, but at some point they might get bored of that. And so by having these conversations on a regular basis, you circumvent that boredom, because at some point they might go, you know what, I'm not that I'm done with that, but I'm still good at that, but I wouldn't mind doing this now and adding that.
Yeah.
And when they're ready to do it, not when the leader wants them to do it necessarily.
Correct. You've got it spot on. And, you might sit there and say, well, I enjoy working with my customers. And the reality is they can't do that by then. So the question then is, you've had that conversation. That's a good thing. That's a liberating thing. And if and when the opportunity arises, we can make that happen. But at the moment, there's nothing we can really do about it. So, and you're right. And then that leads on to something else, and that leads on to something else. And so we're using people's innate talents because, positive psychology, I'm a big believer in it. I think let's start with what we're good at.
Yeah,
let's work with that. And that makes all the difference. And I think that we get, if you had 100 hours to spend on a weakness and 100 hours to spend on a strength, assuming that whatever that was reasonable, you're always going to get a better return on investment on working on the strength because you've got a natural aptitude for it. You're interested in it. It's not difficult, but our society teaches us to work on our weaknesses. And so we've been indoctrinated into believing it's all about getting our weaknesses up to scratch. And you come home, you bring your report card home as a kid, and you've got 43% for English, 82% for maths. The parents will zone in on the low score and say, what are we going to do? Yeah. So we get this idea that it's all about building up and I'm not suggesting we should be dropping the ball on the things we're not good at. Of course, we've got to have a minimum acceptable standard performance, but any other effort put into that is actually not wisely used, because if you put it into a natural talent, you accelerate people's productivity significantly. So that's the reason for conversation too.
The outcome is great. It's got to be greater. I agree. I wonder why. My experience is leaders tend to not like to have these conversations. Performance reviews and the HR director's always going, you haven't done your performance reviews for your team. They're a month overdue. Where are they? Why? What drives that, do you think? Because the logic of what you're saying is, for me, I'm such a logical person to go, duh, have the freaking conversation. Like, that's such a great, why would we not do this? But there's this hesitancy, isn't there?
That's right. I think it comes back to this traditional employment relationship idea that the leader's supposed to be there to be running the show. And this idea of sitting down and having a conversation, which implies, an equal sort of, ebb and flow of conversation, is a bit foreign to a leader who thinks in a very traditional way. But think about it the other way too. If I'm a modern manager and I believe in these conversations, I could be working with an employee who just says, just tell me what you want me to do. I don't believe in all this sitting down and discussing this. Yeah. So the problem is not just with the leaders. It could also be with the traditional employees who think it's all about leaving their brains in a paper bag at the gate and just coming to work and being told what to do. So there's plenty of those out there as well. So I think there's two reasons for that, but I think it's really about the relationship and people the employment relationship and this traditional idea that the boss is supposed to make all the decisions and people are supposed to carry out their, and that's just been around for 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And I agree with you. It's time for a change. But as I said earlier, I think people learn their skills from their previous manager, and it's just passed down from leader to leader. But getting back to good leaders, and you'd agree with this, all good leaders do this. It's obvious. They all do this, and it's just not like pulling teeth. They just expect this to happen. So I think that's a big differentiator.
I think they still do it with a what's the word I'm looking for? With a sense or a demeanor of authority, though. I think sometimes leaders think that if they had these types of conversations, that they're dropping their guard or they're on an equal level. And I don't think you have to do that. I think you can still have these conversations with a level of authority and that says, hey, I'm still the boss here.
Absolutely. And in fact, it actually enhances your influence. And that's really what it's about. It's not about your hierarchical position. It's actually about your ability to influence other people. And if you enter into these conversations, you're actually boosting your influence. And so again, it's a shift in thinking that leadership is really about influence. It's not about a hierarchical position. And yes, a lot of people don't understand that, or they feel insecure about that. But having these conversations does build engagement and trust levels. And if you and I were working together and you were willing to talk to me about my own development, I've got trust in what you're doing, and you say to me, Craig, I'd like you to do this or this, I'm probably likely not only to do it, I've probably already thought about doing it because it's just part of how we work together. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's getting back to being a human, really. And one of my books, the subtitle was called Bringing the Human Being Back to Work. And I think it's very true. We tend to forget this, that any business is a bunch of people working towards a common cause.
Yeah, that's
sometimes I say that to people and they say, oh, that's a revelation. Well, is it? I mean, it's just common sense.
It's been our focus ever since I've been consulting. I've only ever focused on the people skills stuff because personally, I think that's where it's at, and I think that's what we don't do well. Are we having better conversations? Are we presenting well? Do you understand why this person operates the way they do? And if you have a greater awareness about your own preferences, like when we do DISC training, then you're going to better understand the other person's preferences. And there's not right or wrong. It's just going, oh, now I get it. So I can deliver a piece of information differently. I can pull a piece of information differently. And surely you end up with better culture and better creativity and better productivity in a business that way.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, leadership is the people business. That's it. It's not about knowing more than someone else. It's about dealing with people. It's about building that skill set up. 100% agree. And it keeps me out of trouble, of course, and I'm sure it's the same for you because you get lots of work because people just find it really difficult to understand this. But I'd say to any young person listening to this, if you're looking at building your leadership capabilities, work hard on your interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
Work hard on those things. Learn to listen, learn to paraphrase, learn to ask questions, open-ended questions. Those are the skills that will benefit you in the long run. I have no doubt about that.
I totally agree. Books like from what's his name, Richard Bolton. Is it Richard Bolton? It's an old book now. I can see I'll put it in the notes at some point. He was fantastic around communication, and then people like Andrew Denton, watching him do an interview, or a Michael Parkinson. There's some real life examples of this is how you listen. This is how you have a conversation, and see where it lands.
Absolutely. And that's why I think conversation is the most underrated leadership skill out there. We kind of just don't understand the incredible power and influence that has. And, I was working with a client the other day, and their turnover is about 25%, and they called me in and asked me to bring my magic wand. And I said to them, how are you going with your conversations? They said, oh, no, I know all about your work, and, we don't have time for these conversations. And, and of course I was speechless, and I didn't quite know how to handle that because it was so obvious to me that there was a big correlation between turnover and the fact that their leaders weren't communicating effectively with the direct reports. Big mistake, big problem. And people just don't see what's in front of them, which is really about that business. And it's not about being warm and soppy. And I mean, you can still have a robust conversation and walk away, and people are better off. I mean, you've still got to be tactful, and those are all skills to be learned. But at the end of the day, you can agree to disagree. You can have a different point of view. And that's, I think, what leadership's all about, is that ability to connect with the people that you lead. Makes all the difference. I mean, look at I know you're a sports nut, and so am I. You show me a good coach in any sport, and I'll show you a leader who's got outstanding interpersonal skills. They might have good technical skills, but usually it's the differentiator is those outstanding skills. They care. They're interested. they actually follow through,
Mm.
and the players play for them. And it's as simple as that. And it's no different in the corporate world, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I was fortunate enough to interview John Buchanan, actually. He
Yeah, yeah, I know, John. Yeah,
ex-Aussie coach, as you know. And
yep.
yeah, that was intriguing because at the time, he had people like Shane Warne, and and I remember asking him, how the heck did you coach
Yeah.
slash manage an enigma like a Shane Warne? But yeah, it was knowing what to say, when to say it, and have the right conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Shane would have been, bless his soul, it would have been a very difficult person to manage and lead. But um, yeah, look, it is all about connecting, isn't it? It's as simple and as difficult as that.
I'm
Actually, if you
glad
looked at it,
yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think conceptually it is reasonably simple, but I know even at home my kids will go, "But Dad, you're a communication coach. How come you can't talk to us properly?" It's like, oh, stab in the heart, girls. But there's some validity in what they're saying as well. As
yeah,
why am I not listening sometimes, or am I frustrated with
yeah,
something else that's happening, and therefore this conversation is not as good as it could be? And I think that's probably a good lesson for any leader coming through. If you've got stress or something else is going on, acknowledge that emotion or that feeling and don't have that conversation yet. Have it when you're in a better
e-
space, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, it's so true. And I think I read somewhere your brain can process something like 500 words a minute, and we talk about
Yeah.
280 to 300 words a minute. So there's a deficit there. So while someone's talking, people are thinking, I wonder what I'll have for lunch, or I've heard this before, or I know what they're going to say. Or like you said earlier, I've got something I want to say. I wish they'd shut up so I could say it. So you've got this sort of gap in the middle, which really derails leaders. But I often say if it's worth having a conversation, then turn the phone off, go somewhere where you won't be disturbed, and give it as much energy as you would if you were writing a report that
Mm.
was critical to the success of the business. And so it's about working hard on those skills, no doubt. And they're not soft skills, as we know, they're hard skills, which unfortunately got a very poor name as soft skills, as if they don't mean much. They mean everything, really.
Well, I noticed your choice of words earlier, which is work on the interpersonal skills. And that's more appropriate and more descriptive of what we're talking about here is how do you work with other people and how do you converse with other people in such a way that, yeah, well, in a leadership role, you get to influence them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I know you're accredited in DISC and so am I. And these tools can be very powerful because they can sort of give people a sense of who's who in the room, and they can just tweak or
Mm.
change their approach depending on what the person comes across. And so those tools do have a role,
Mm.
I think, and they can be very valuable. But at the end of the day, the leader's got to understand that their job is about influence. And you can't influence anybody if you don't have a working relationship with them. You just can't. Not really. I mean, you might go to the doctor and you'll do what he's told or what she says. But at the end of the day, it's not like that in the workplace. This is a person that you're working with day to day, and you've got to build that relationship up. In fact, I did a job for general practitioners on bedside manner,
Mm.
and we actually did some research to show that the more the doctor had good bedside manner, the more the patient would actually listen to what the doctor had to say. Because most people don't listen to what the doctor's got to say, which I find amazing. 2 tablets twice a day, they don't do it. And you say to these people, well, why? And they say, because he or she's just a script provider. They're
Mm.
not interested in me.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's someone that really knows what they're talking about, you'd hope, and the patient doesn't listen to them. So it's all about bedside manner. It's all about that ability to develop rapport with people.
There's a wonderful movie, Remember the Titans. There's a section in there where the the teams have joined together, black team, white team joined together, and there's the whole black and white thing going on. And the comment is attitude reflects leadership. And I always love that. I think, is the attitude of your staff a reflection of your leadership? But I kind of like what we've come to today, which is this idea that um, leadership is about influencing.
Yeah, yeah, I think it is. And you can't do that unless you've got a working relationship both ways as well, by the way. It's not just about the manager. I mean, if the employee, if people understand where someone's coming from, they're going to have more influence over their manager as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So it works both ways in that relationship.
absolutely. So you said you had 18 books, Tim. So you're obviously a prolific writer. Where can people get your books? What's the best place to get them?
Okay, well, I think Amazon's always a good start. So you just go in there, and there's another Tim Baker that's out there who's in the surfing world. So that's not me, by the way, but I quite enjoy the surf. But he writes about surfing. But if you type in Dr. Tim Baker, you'll get a list of those books, and I've got one coming out later this year, which I'm very excited about, called Successful Self Leadership.
Oh, no.
And it's the 7 practices of self leadership. And it's being published in the United States. It should be out later this year, which really talks about working on yourself.
Love it.
Most leadership is around learning how to deal with other people. But my argument is you can't really do that unless you start with yourself. So
Mm.
self-development is key to any leader's success. Show me a good leader. I'll show you a leader that works very hard at their own personal development.
That sounds like that should have come out before some of the others.
Probably, yeah. Just I've always wanted to write that book because I teach that subject at uni and thoroughly enjoy it. And but it's really about looking in the mirror and just saying, well, what
What
am
is
I?
your favorite book other than that one that's about to come out? What's your favorite book that you
Oh, look, the one that's really there's
better
two that took off
things?
really well. One's called The End of the Performance Review, and really I talk about the 5 conversations framework, which I've shared with you today. So that's out. And the other one is the new influencing toolkit. And there's a diagnostic in there, and you can work out what your influencing style is.
Oh, no.
And there's 100 different exercises that very practical things that you can do in the workplace that'll help you build your own influencing capability. And surprise, surprise, most of that's based on connecting with the person at the receiving end, of course.
Is that online?
Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah, you could get that through Amazon as well.
Yeah, great. Awesome.
Or you can go to my website too, which is www.winnersatwork.com.au. I've got some books available there as well.
Beautiful. And what does Dr. Tim Baker do when he's not doing leadership and influencing other organisations to be better leaders?
Yeah, well, I'm an absolute nut at the gym junkie. I've been working out in the gym for 18 years, since I was 18, and and again, it's probably, why did that happen? Well, I guess because when I walked into the gym, the guy that owned the gym actually took an interest in helping me get set up.
Wow.
Showed me the exercises, showed me what I needed to do, talked a little bit about nutrition, took an interest. Amazing, enormous influence. And I just love it. It's my way of staying sane.
Yeah, absolutely. And good as we get older, by the sound of it. It's supposed to be a good thing to be in the gym doing some weights and so forth.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And it's a bit of a myth to say that you can't develop beyond a certain age, and your muscles don't know how old you are. So you can deal with that. It's not a problem.
Dr. Tim Baker, thank you so much for your time. I feel like I could talk to you for another couple of hours. There's so much content there, but I really, really appreciate your time that you've given me today.
Thank you, Craig. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.